11. International non-governmental organizations, humanitarian organizations. Introduction. The aim of this study session is to introduce you to international non-governmental organizations, INGOs, with particular reference to humanitarian organizations, using Amnesty International as our case study. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to explain what INGOs are, describe briefly the formation of Amnesty International, mention the achievements of Amnesty International, and describe how their activities affect Africa. International non-governmental organizations. International non-governmental organizations are voluntary and professional organizations established by individuals, groups, and states for the attainment of certain purposes outside the normal intergovernmental organization framework. Their formation might not necessarily involve the consent of states or governments. In most cases, they are non-political but humanitarian organizations. They might, however, have political interests, or their activities might not be politically neutral and might also be important politically. There are basically two types of INGOs, namely voluntary and professional. Voluntary organizations consist of human rights organizations like Amnesty International, International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, International Federation of the Rights of Man, and International Institute of Human Rights, Strasbourg, and churches and religious organizations, for example, World Council of Churches, World Jewish Congress, etc., and scholarship aid and student organizations like World University Service, World Assembly of Youth, etc. The professional INGOs include lawyers' associations like the International Commission of Jurists, International Association of Democratic Lawyers, etc. Professional organizations like International Press Institute, Interparliamentary Union, and the World Federation of Scientific Workers, among others. Some INGOs, like those dealing with refugees, like International Social Service, International Labour Assistance, are also examples of INGOs. The work and activities of INGOs are very important to all initiatives on human rights and humanitarian services. In particular, the human rights organizations do initiate their own inquiries, that is, on human rights violation, make representation to the governments in question, and where necessary, influence by lobbying the intergovernmental agencies. They also function for information on human rights violations and serve as a channel of information between national affiliates and other interested organizations. Of all the INGOs, the Amnesty International and the International Committee of the Red Cross are the ones that are more pronounced in Africa. But we are limiting our discussion here to Amnesty International because of the nature of its activities that has a lot of impact on African states. Also, it constitutes the strongest organized international pressure group for the respect of human rights. Origin and aims of Amnesty International. Amnesty International has a modest British beginning. It was founded by Peter Benson in the United Kingdom in 1961 with the aim of defending freedom of speech, opinion, and religion in all parts of the world. From the modest beginning, It has today built up a formidable reputation in the field of human rights work. According to Amnesty International report of 1978, it has now become a worldwide movement which is independent of any government, political grouping, ideology, economic interest, or religious creed. Amnesty International organization, which is a voluntary or movement of active volunteer members, plays a specific role within the overall spectrum of human rights work. It has formal relations with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, UNESCO, the Council of Europe, the Organization of American States, and the defunct OAU, now AU. The activities of the organization focus strictly on prisoners. 1. It seeks the release of men and women detained anywhere for their beliefs, color, sex, ethnic origin, language, or religion, provided that they have not used or advocated violence. These are termed prisoners of conscience or political prisoners detained without charge or without trial. 2. It opposes the death penalty and torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment of all prisoners without reservation. The basis of the actions of Amnesty International is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international instruments. For example, Article 1 of its statute, which contains the policy of the organization, its main object is to secure throughout the world the observance of the provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The organization engages in practical work for prisoners within its mandate and participates in the wider promotions and protection of all spheres of human rights. Membership. The membership of the organization is open to anyone. The volunteer members may belong to formal Amnesty International bodies such as sections, that is, which are the national coordinating bodies in countries and groups. Some do not belong to either and are mere supporters in their individual capacities or are subscribers. However, most Amnesty International activists belong to a local group, but in some sections there exist many activists who are not necessarily involved in group activities. No section, group, or member is expected to provide information on their own country. They do not also have any responsibility for action taken or statements issued by the international organization concerning their own country. As at 1987, Amnesty International had more than 500,000 members, subscribers, and supporters in over 150 countries and territories. At the beginning of 1987, there were Amnesty International sections in 44 countries and 3,744 local groups in 60 countries. Finance. Given the nature of the aims of Amnesty International, its financial independence is as vital as its political independence. Hence, it is entirely self-financing. The dependence of Amnesty International on public sources rather than governments is to keep away political interference by governments. So, to be independent and impartial, it has to be self-financing. In order to safeguard the organization's independence, all contributions are strictly controlled by guidelines laid down by the International Council. Its funding comes from individual membership fees, donations, fundraising campaigns, and sale of publication. Other sources are public events and contributions by groups. In-text questions. 1. The World Wide Fund, WWF, is a governmental international organization for the protection of the environment. B. Organization for Protection of Nature International Organization. C. Voluntary international non-governmental organization for the protection of the environment. D. Professional international non-governmental organization for the protection of the environment. 2. Financial independence of international non-governmental organization is a prerequisite for political independence. A. True. B. False. Feedbacks on the in-text questions. 1. The correct answer is C. If you chose option A, B, or D, then you are incorrect, because the WWF is a voluntary international non-governmental organization which was established on the 26th of April 1961. Its main objective is conservation, research, and restoration of the environment. 2. The correct answer is A. If you chose option B, then you are incorrect, because international non-governmental organizations can only sustain their autonomous space as long as they are able to stay government funding. Organization of Amnesty International. One essential feature of Amnesty work is in its combination of grassroots activities and initiative at all national and international levels. The activities of the various local groups in various sections, that is, countries, and on a variety of issues requires a degree of backup national and international levels. This is reflected in the organizational setup of the organization, starting with the local Amnesty International groups and national sections at the country level, and the International Council, International Executive Committee, and International Secretariat. There are also international committees set up by the International Council or by the International Executive Committee. Local Amnesty International groups. This is the basic unit of Amnesty International's structure and work. Groups normally consist of 10 to 15 members. This, however, could be more. These groups, which are steadily growing, are normally registered with the International Secretariat. Each group works on behalf of at least 2 individual prisoners of conscience in countries other than its own. The group seeks the prisoner's release, a fair and prompt trial, and further information about the prisoner's situation, depending on the nature of the case. Group actions are normally conceived within the context of national approaches to embassies, national organizations, and parliamentary bodies, and in nationwide public education campaigns, and within an overall international strategy and activities at diplomatic levels, missions and trial obligations, publish statements and reports. Group members may send appeals direct to the authorities of the country concerned and send relief to the prisoners and their families if required. Groups are also expected to support the campaign for the abolition of torture and program for the abolition of the death penalty through participating in the Urgent Action Scheme on special appeals and campaign. Also, groups contribute to the funding of the organization by conducting fundraising activities. The funds they raise cover their own operating costs, provide relief for prisoners, and support for Amnesty International section in their country. There is no hard rule on the internal organization of a group. The most important thing is for the group to observe the statute and working rules of the organization. Sections. Amnesty International's national sections provide a focal point for amnesty actions within their own country. They provide networks for campaigns and casework, fundraising and publicity. The section also serves as an intermediary between their member groups and the International Secretariat. An Amnesty International section is recognized by the International Executive Committee, and it is responsible for executing the organization's international policy. All sections have an executive committee or national board elected by the members. It is responsible for coordinating and administering the activities of Amnesty International members and groups in that country. The section is responsible for training new groups. The International Council. This is the supreme governing body of Amnesty International. It consists of representatives of all sections who attend both as delegates and as observers. Its functions and powers are: 1. It reviews the activities of the International Executive Committee and the International Secretariat and endorses a plan for the coming year. 2. It elects 8 of the members of the International Executive Committee. 3. It receives the accounts, approves the overall budget, and agrees on the financial contributions to be made by all sections. The meeting of the Council was being held yearly between 1968 and 1983 on invitation of one of Amnesty International's section. But since 1983, it has been meeting once in 2 years. The meeting of the Council normally lasts for 4.5 days. International Executive Committee. This is a body elected by the Council to implement its policies. It acts as the main governing body between Council meetings, and it is responsible for the work of International Secretariat and all sections. It has 9 members, 7 each from a different Amnesty International section or country, and the Treasury, as well as the International Secretariat staff representative. All members serve a term of 2 years and can be re-elected for a maximum of 3 consecutive terms. It normally meets 4 times a year. The International Secretariat. It is based in London and staffed by local volunteers and paid staff of about 150 people from at least 20 countries. Through its staff, it implements the strategy of the organization, which is formulated in overall terms by an annual International Council meeting representing the sections and by International Executive Council. Internal committees. Apart from the above, there exist some international committees established by either the International Councilor or the International Executive Committee. These committees advise the Councilor, the Executive Committee, on aspects of the organization's work. Members of most committees are appointed by the International Executive Committee in consultation with sections. There are now 5 permanent international committees: the Financial Control Committee, the Borderline Committee, the Medical Advisory Committee, the Advisory Group on Information Handling and Technology, Infotech, and the Committee for Systematic Evaluation of Techniques, SYSTEC. Achievements of Amnesty International. Amnesty International, within a period of 27 years, has emerged as the strongest organized international pressure group for the respect of human rights. Its achievements are: 1. It has helped in the promotion of human rights, particularly in the areas of prisoners' rights and freedom of thought and speech, right to life, freedom from inhuman treatment and torture, and right to fair trial. Hence, it is being referred to as the International Human Rights Watchdog. 2. It has succeeded in preventing political imprisonment and promoting the need to abolish death penalty and torture. It maintains an unbending policy against a cruel, inhuman, and degrading punishment and a violation of the right to life. 3. It increases public awareness of human rights through the involvement of its members in human rights education of citizens and educational materials like its numerous literature. 4. It checks the various state governments through Amnesty International reports published annually. And 5. It has helped to promote improved international standards for the protection of human rights. Bodies like the United Nations have taken important steps, such as declaring a universal ban on torture. Amnesty International and Africa. Amnesty International is very weak in Africa. Of the 44 sections, only 4, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Senegal, are in Africa. There were, however, Amnesty International groups with no sections in some other countries. The achievements of Amnesty International in Africa are discussed above. But African sections and groups have not been effective as such. The various problems are due to factors internal and external to Amnesty International sections and groups in Africa. There is also differing perceptions of Amnesty International. Some of the internal problems are lack of communication between the sections and their groups on one hand, and the sections or groups and the International Secretariat on the other hand. Lack of commitment or motivation, lack of adequate finance, and lack of permanent staff. The external problems are the non-conducive political, social, and economic conditions in African states. Also, people are impervious to Amnesty International as they see it as a Western organization. Furthermore, the policy of Amnesty International, which prevents local groups and national sections from taking up cases in their countries, make their contributions to be invisible. Hence, people cannot actually perceive its usefulness. Death penalty. Death penalty is also known as capital punishment. It is a legal process whereby a person is put to death by the state as a punishment for a serious crime. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned that international non-governmental organizations, INGOs, are voluntary and non-political organizations established for certain specific purposes. They are established by individual or groups of individuals without necessarily having to gain the consent of government. You also learned that Amnesty International was founded by Peter Benson in the United Kingdom in 1961. Amnesty International aims at securing the immediate and unconditional release of all prisoners of conscience, ensure fair and prompt trials for all political prisoners, and abolish torture and executions. Amnesty International has sections in 44 countries and 3,744 local groups in over 60 countries. You also learned that Amnesty International is self-financing, and this is the basis of its political independence. Amnesty International works through local Amnesty International groups, sections, the International Council, the International Executive Committee, and the International Secretariat. It also has international committees. Amnesty International has recorded a lot of achievement in the field of human rights generally. End of study session 11. Thanks for listening.